and teach. I got caught up first with Bill Steiger from Wisconsin, a young congressman, and then later with Don Rumsfeld, and served in the Nixon administration for 4 years. Left, went into private business, and after the '72 election, after having served in a couple of the executive branch agencies in the White House, down about 4 layers in the Nixon administration. So I sat in Washington on the outside for 18 months as the Nixon administration came apart, as we went through the Watergate crises and the scandals and the investigations and so forth. I watched all of that unfold. And then on the night before President Nixon resigned, when he went on nationwide television and announced that he was going to resign at noon the next day, I received a call from Brussels, where Don Rumsfeld, who had been my boss in the Nixon administration, was then assigned as ambassador to NATO. I got a phone call from Don's secretary, which said that he was en route back to the States, to Washington. He'd land at Dulles the next afternoon at 2 o'clock, and would I meet his plane, which I agreed to do. In the meantime, between that evening when President Nixon spoke and the next afternoon, of course, we had the very emotional ceremony in the East Wing where he spoke to the staff and said, in effect, goodbye to the staff, and then left, and Ford was sworn in. I watched all of that on television, and then I went to out to Dulles Airport and met Don, and as he got off the airplane, he was also met by a White House messenger who had a letter from him, for him, and the letter was directed him to come straight to the White House and asked that he consider taking over the responsibility of being the leader of the transition team for new President Ford. We rode into town together, and Don in turn asked me if I could get away from my job for a few days and help out with the transition, which I agreed to do. So that was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the day that the President was sworn in. That afternoon, he spent virtually the first 4 or 5 hours he was President meeting with ambassadors, reassuring both our NATO allies that there would be no fundamental change in policy because of Richard Nixon's resignation, that he would continue the policies that were in place. He met with the Soviet ambassador and others, and the first few hours were very much devoted to that proposition that he wanted to reassure everyone around the world that the political crisis in the American government would have no impact on policy. Then about 5 o'clock, he met with the transition team. And the team, of course, consisted of Don Rumsfeld, Raj Morton, Bob Griffin, who I think has been down, Jack Marsh, now Secretary of the Army, and others. And his assignment to the transition team said a lot about the problems we faced in the Ford administration. The initial assignment was that we were to look at the entire organization of the White House, the way the White House related to the cabinet, look at the way the cabinet was organized, look at personnel, look at the Office of Management and Budget. But there was one area that was off limits that we were not to get involved in, and that specifically was the national security area. We were not to study or make recommendations about the National Security Council. We were not to talk about state or defense or CIA. That complex of national security agencies was basically left untouched by the transition team. And that was a reflection very much of the problem the President faced, that on the one hand, there was a great need after the strife and turmoil of the Watergate years to reassure everyone, especially our allies and adversaries overseas, that we were going to emphasize continuity. On the other hand, at home, after all of the scandal and turmoil of Watergate, it was very important to emphasize change, that the old crowd was out, that we'd had a house cleaning at the White House, that the people that had been responsible for the Watergate scandals were no longer in power. So you had those conflicting objectives. You had to emphasize continuity on the one hand and change on the other. And one of the ways he did that at the outset was to direct that we take a good hard look and thoroughly scrub that whole set of relationships and organizational arrangements that was the domestic side of the House, but we leave the foreign policy, national security apparatus alone for the time being. Partly, I think that was also a reflection of Henry Kissinger's influence, obviously. Henry was then head of the NSC and Secretary of State, a unique arrangement in American history. But my beginning then was during that transition time, and as I say, we spent about 10 days on the transition operations, wrote a report, and then I left at the end of that period of time. We were in a hurry to get the transition behind us, and we didn't want to have the transition team and the White House staff functioning side by side. We thought that would create great confusion. So after about 10 days, this would have been around the 20th of August or thereabouts, I left and went back to my business, and Don Rumsfeld left and went back to NATO. Then September 9th or thereabouts, the first week in September, was the Nixon pardon, which created great turmoil, needless to say. And about the 16th, about a week after the pardon, I got another phone call, this time from Don again. He was in Chicago, back on a home visit, and I was in Florida on business, and he asked me to meet that weekend in Washington, which I did. And Saturday afternoon in a hotel room there, and he indicated that he had a private meeting with the president the next afternoon, that he believed he was going to be offered the job of White House Chief of Staff, that he had reason to believe that Al Haig was going to be asked to leave, take on a new assignment as Commander-in-Chief of NATO, and that Don would be asked to take over. He wanted to know, one, what did I think of that, and secondly, if he agreed to take the post, would I agree to sign on as his deputy? We agreed that we'd get together the next afternoon.